In this lesson, we're going to talk about something that can be a little bit uncomfortable for people who came from a public school teaching background, where we sort of really separated the work that we do from the costs and the pay that we take. And as public employees, that's a whole different way of thinking about the work you do and the money you make. And now, running your tutoring business, you need to start thinking about that. And the work that you do, the service that you provide, is going to be much more closely tied to the money you bring in. And you need to start thinking about it that way. First, before we do this, I want to remind you again, any recommendations I make, none of this is official legal advice or tax advice or business advice. I can talk to you about the approaches I have taken. And ultimately, if you have questions that are specific to your situation, it is worth the time and worth the investment to talk to a professional who can give you answers and peace of mind about what you need to do for your own situation. One of the first steps to getting paid as a tutor is setting your rates. This can be challenging for a lot of tutors. We don't want to overcharge. We don't want to undercharge and undervalue our skills. So here are some factors to think about when you're setting your rates. One is your training. Are you a licensed teacher? Are you certified in a particular approach? Do you belong to a professional organization that you trained or certified with? And do they have any recommendations for you or a directory of tutors already doing what you do? Another factor is the population of students that you work with. Generally, parents pay more for tutoring for older students, thinking about specialized high school subjects or test prep for older students. But with Orton Gillingham, that is a specialized approach, and many parents come to realize that that costs more than getting general academic tutoring. And so the age population that you work with may impact the rates you can charge, but if you have a specialty like Orton Gillingham or Barton or Wilson, you may find that the age of the student is not as much of a factor. If you work with public school students versus private school versus homeschool, you may find some differences. Parents that are already paying for a private school are of a mindset that it is worth investing cash in their children's education. And so their philosophy on tutoring and their willingness to pay a higher rate may be different than parents who have enrolled their children in public school and either don't have the funds to pay a high rate for private tutoring or believe that education should be free through the public school. So they may have a different philosophy. Homeschool parents often have a parent who has chosen to stay home to educate the kids, and so they may have less money available as a family to pay a tutor, and they may not be willing to pay as high a rate. However, um, these are families where a parent has done a lot of work of educating the child, and they may value that and value the specialized instruction that you can offer. So all of these are things to consider, but they're not always black and white. The cost that you pay per student for materials is another factor that you want to consider in setting your rates. If you pay a per student charge for a subscription to any service, or if you provide physical materials to your students, even if it's a binder and some manipulatives, and if you're printing material for them or buying books to share with them, those are all costs that should go into the way you set your rates. You can charge a materials fee to parents. There may be some guidelines about in terms of taxes about creating a product for sale, meaning you are making a profit on the materials you send, versus sending the materials at cost to the student. So that's something to consider and look at the details of. But if you put together any kind of a welcome kit or hands-on kit with manipulatives for your students, that is you may want to either charge an upfront fee for those materials or work that amount into your hourly rate to make sure that you are fairly compensated for the materials you're providing. Another consideration is whether the service you offer is widely available or if it's something rare or if it's something that's in high demand. So in certain areas, it's very easy to find a trained or certified Orton Gillingham tutor. The schools offer many trained professionals. And in other areas, it's harder to find that specialized instruction. And as a result, if that's what parents are looking for, they may be willing to pay more if they have been having a hard time finding the service they need. Geography makes a huge difference because obviously tutors get paid more in areas where the cost of living is higher. So as an online tutor, you can make the most of that by tutoring students in areas where the going rate is higher than it may be in your own area. My local tutoring rate would be lower than what I make tutoring students in some of the large cities, New York, LA, San Francisco. And in turn, those parents are getting a good deal because a local tutor would charge a higher rate than I charge. So it works out for both of us. And finally, your experience plays into the rate you charge. If you have lots of years in the classroom or lots of years as a tutor, or if you're trained in lots of different curriculum and have experience with many different types of students, you can charge a higher rate than someone who is just starting out and doesn't have that experience. Part of what you're saying when you say you have a lot of experience is you know you can produce results. And that's ultimately what parents are looking for when they hire a tutor. The fear is always, what if my rates are too high? And I think there's two sides to that coin. If your rates are too low, you run the risk of burning yourself out or of having to do so many hours that it sort of dilutes the quality of your work. And if your rates are too high, your schedule will be slow to fill. And sometimes it can be hard to tell whether people aren't taking you up on your services because your rates are too high or because there's something else about your approach that isn't working out for them. So you can always try out different price points, especially as you're getting started, and see what prices parents are responding to. It takes a long time to gather this data. I generally say err on the side of starting at a slightly lower rate because you can always raise your rates for new students as they come in or raise your rates for everyone down the road, but without charging a rate that is so low that it makes it not worth your time. One tip I heard that I love is to compare the rates that you're charging to the fees for other lessons parents invest in. So take a look at parents who are paying for private coaching or sports camps or paying for piano lessons or some other kind of specialized training. Compare your rates to those professionals rather than trying to compare apples to apples with tutors because there are so many different kinds of tutors, right? There are high school and college students who tutor after school. There are teachers who tutor with their own classroom materials for a little extra income. There are retirees, and there are professionals who tutor full time. And then there are people who do something completely unrelated to education who happen to have a love of a subject or expertise in an area, and they offer tutoring. So those are all going to come at very different price points because they're all very different products. So trying to look at, what does a tutor make in my zip code is sometimes not as informative as looking at the other kind of things parents invest in for their kids in your community and using that as a guideline for setting your own rates. So you've decided what to charge. Now, how do you actually get the money into your hands? How do you get paid for online tutoring? The simplest and the least expensive in terms of fees are Zelle and PayPal. So Zelle, you have to have an account at a participating bank, and so does your client. And PayPal is available to anyone with an email address. You can convert your existing PayPal account, the one you use to buy stuff on eBay, to a business account for free, and that allows you to set up invoices. And you can either set up single one-off invoices for a session, for a week, for a month, or you can set up a recurring series of invoices. So this week, this fall, we're going to meet twice a week at this hourly rate. Here's your invoice for the month, and it will automatically send it out on September 1st, October 1st, November 1st, December 1st. And that is helpful. It cuts down on your paperwork time. You can also set up payment processing with a number of providers so that you can accept credit and debit cards. And you can do this through PayPal. Square and Stripe are two other big names in that industry, and those allow you to set up recurring payments. Venmo is something that a lot of tutors use. It's simple. It is geared toward person-to-person transfers, like splitting a check or going in on a group gift. And so there are a lot of default features like sharing in your, your feed who you received money from or who you sent money to. You can turn those sharing features off, and that's something that you want to be careful with if you're using Venmo in a professional capacity. There are several different payment models for how you can charge your students, regardless of what tool you're using to collect the money. One is pay per session, and I think this is generally sort of more common with in-person tutors. You deliver your session, you're in the dining room, before you leave, the parents hand you a check or hand you some cash. That's pretty common for in-person tutors. If you're using a pay per session model online, you can set the expectation that parents pay you either before the session or right after the session. You can decide whether you just tell the parent, like, this amount will be due after every session, and wait for them to initiate that payment. Or you can create an invoice through PayPal, through Stripe, through QuickBooks or Wave if you use them for accounting. You're going to send out an invoice. The parent is going to pay it through that system. If you use a pay per session model, it's harder to charge for no-shows because the same family that will forget to show up for a session may also forget to pay you for that session. So it becomes a little more work for you in terms of chasing down payments and making those corrections. Generally, pay per session has a little more of an informal tone for a tutoring business. So I think of this as being well suited to short-term tutoring engagements, to people who are not doing this as a full-time business, and just sort of informally accept cash in the same way that my babysitter takes cash, or the guy who mows my lawn might take cash. So it's less of a formal arrangement. Kind of moving up in terms of predictability for you and formality would be to ask parents to pay weekly. So parents could submit one payment at the beginning of the week for any sessions coming up in the week. This using a weekly model gives you flexibility over some of the models I'm going to talk about next. So if you say, oh, I just realized Halloween's on a Wednesday this year, I am canceling that Wednesday session, so this week you're just going to pay me for 2 sessions. It makes your income a bit more predictable because you're getting paid for the whole week in advance, but it also gives you flexibility because if one of you cancels for the upcoming week, they can just pay you for the sessions they're going to use. You may end up chasing payments with this model. So if they forget to pay you before the Monday session and you look after the Monday session, you've got to contact them again, and maybe they'll remember on Tuesday, but maybe you're kind of chasing them a little to get them to pay. Again, you could do this either by asking the parent to initiate the payment or by sending out an invoice every Sunday for the coming week. Another tuition model that is popular is the fixed tuition amount. So this requires a little more setup, and you really have to know your schedule in advance to do this. So the approach is you add up all the sessions you're going to tutor over a given period of time, and that could be the fall term, that could be the school year, whatever you decide your commitment is that you're asking for from parents. If you're meeting twice a week, you look at the calendar and you count up all those 2s, and then you subtract the weeks with holidays, and you subtract a week for spring break, and then maybe you subtract a sick day in case they need to cancel. And then you multiply that by your hourly rate, and then you divide it into how many payments they're going to make. With this approach, you need to decide how you will handle cancellations. Are you going to have a spot in your schedule for rescheduling? Are you going to give a credit if they cancel with sufficient notice? Or are you going to say, sorry, no cancellations, this is your spot? And And I think there's room for all those models. There are lots of things in life where if we don't use a service we've paid for, if we cancel the yoga class we paid for, or we cancel the swimming lesson, or we don't attend the swimming lesson we booked, um, there are rarely opportunities for makeups or for refunds. And so I think that's certainly a model people understand. I think it's hard for me as a tutor to say I spent that hour at my desk, but I'm charging you for it because you couldn't make it. You knew you had a dentist appointment. So I try to take a middle ground here. So I require 24 hours notice to cancel a lesson. If they give me shorter notice, or if they no-show a lesson, I don't offer any sort of refund or rescheduling, but if they let me know, coming up next week or coming up the first Thursday next month, there's a school concert or a field trip or an appointment, um, I will try to offer an opportunity for rescheduling. And if we can't do it within about a week or two, I will. So if we're not able to fit it in the schedule in the next couple of weeks, I'll just put it on as a credit on next month's bill. A similar model, and one that gives you a little bit more flexibility than tuition, a little less planning ahead, but also some predictability in your income, is a weekly or monthly recurring payment model. You set this up as a subscription payment or as a recurring payment. With PayPal, you now need to pay an additional fee of about $20 a month to have this option of a subscription payment, a recurring charge. However, it's something that you can set up through Stripe or Square. With PayPal, you can set up recurring invoices with their free business account, just pay the transfer fee. But you can no longer set up the free automatic monthly payments. So you decide when you have a weekly or monthly recurring charge, you decide again how you'll handle cancellations, how much time you require, and what you'll do if they give you enough notice. For a weekly or monthly recurring payment, it's a fixed amount. So it's based on your hourly rate and the number of hours you see the student, but it is the same every month. I base mine on an average 4-week month. So if we're meeting Wednesdays at 6, I charge you for 4 Wednesdays a month. And if this month has a 5th Wednesday, that's a bonus. So we keep the amount the same, which adds predictability for parents and for me in my banking, and also streamlines the process of invoicing because I don't have to do anything weekly, and I don't have to look ahead at the month and look at our schedule. I just say, every month I see you about 4 times. So here's my preferred process. Here's what I'm doing now. I prefer to set up a recurring payment using Stripe. Square would also work for this. I chose Stripe because when I made the move, I had a student outside of the US who wanted to use a Canadian credit card, and Stripe was the processor where I was able to confirm that they could pay with a non-US currency for a US invoice. So I use Stripe. I set up a recurring payment, they call it a subscription, for a fixed amount each month. And it's based on my hourly rate times the sessions I see them each week times 4 weeks. The client inputs their card info in the secure site. They get an email with a link that opens the invoice, and they put their card info in. I never handle any credit cards, and the payments arrive for me automatically. And with Stripe, they arrive in my Stripe account, they're held there for a day or two, and then they're automatically transferred to my business account. And I do offer a rescheduling policy. So if the clients give me more than 24 hours of notice, I offer them some opportunities to reschedule, or they can accept a credit on next month's invoice. And that works for me. I work from home. There's always something I can do if I happen to not be seeing a student that particular hour. So that's something that I'm open to. And I think families have yet to abuse that privilege. I did have a student with a fair number of no-shows. They were not credited or given the opportunity to reschedule. And ultimately, they decided that they were going to stop working with me. And I think that was the best choice. They were they were paying for a service that they were not prioritizing and they were not using. And I think that if that student was paying weekly or per session, I would have lost out on about half my tutoring fee. But because they had already paid for the month in advance, it's still frustrating, and it's, still the work of emailing and following up and figuring out what's going on. But it didn't hurt me financially that this family didn't follow through on their commitment. And I think that um, as a professional tutor and as someone who is depending on this income, you have to set things up in a way that protects you. And that's why that's my process. So another shift as a person running a small business from a person getting a paycheck is that you really have to pay attention to the money, um, especially at the beginning, especially until you find your groove. Um, any payment processor you would use, PayPal, Stripe, Square, they all offer downloadable reports that are going to function like a bank statement. You'll be able to see all of the payments that came in. You'll be able to see the fees that you were charged. You also need to keep an eye on the payment screens to figure out which invoices have been paid or make sure that all the payments have been completed and follow up on that. Um, you can use this information to figure out your actual hourly rate. So if you have, you can keep track of the hours you work in a week, tutoring, planning, communicating with families, and you can figure out how much money you brought in that week, and you can figure out what you're actually making per hour. This is very telling and sometimes a little sad, especially at the beginning when you're spending a ton of uncompensated time on marketing, on developing materials. But I think it's helpful information, and you're going to watch that number grow over time as your caseload grows and as you become more efficient. And remember that you started this business to pay yourself a reasonable wage. So if you're finding that you're making minimum wage for the hours that you're putting in, you need to look at what you can change to make your business work better for you. So whether that's increasing your hourly rate or working harder to fill your caseload, it takes time, but there are things you can do to speed up that process. You or whether you are spending too much on materials and it's cutting into your actual income, you need to think about what you can do to make sure that this business is working out well for you. You probably left another job, either teaching or working for someone else, to become a tutor. And you have to make sure it's a business that is sustainable and will ultimately make you happy. Then there will come a time in every tutor's career where you decide it's time to raise the rates. And that can be an uncomfortable decision, just like asking for a raise in a job is uncomfortable. But there are ways to sort of ease the process and make sure that it works out well for everyone. One is, if you're going to raise rates on current clients, make sure you do it at a logical time. So these changes tend to happen at the beginning of the school year or January 1st. You can start giving your current clients notice in advance of this change that it's coming. Let them know what the new rate's going to be, when it's going to take effect. You don't have to explain why you're raising your rates. You may want to say, due to increased expenses, or, now that I've become certified in this area, or something. But ultimately, you don't need to tell them why you're raising the rates, just that you are. And think about, when you're presenting that rate, think about how that's going to appear to parents in terms of either dollars per hour, in terms of a percentage. You may, if you realize your rates are way too low, you may need to raise the rates a little bit and a little bit again in 6 months until you get up to a point that you feel comfortable with. An alternative to setting a date and raising rates for everyone is to just raise the rate on new clients. And this is what I've chosen to do in my business. And the reasons for this are a few. So one, the families that I've seen for a long time, some of them have been with me since the very beginning of my online tutoring work, and they have been incredibly valuable sources of referrals. And I don't want to lose those clients, which is not to say that if you raise rates, you lose clients, but it's not something I've chosen to do. And the other factor is tutoring clients don't stay with you forever, right? They're kids, they grow, they develop, they outgrow what you teach, or they move on for another reason. So I have chosen to leave the rate that a family signs on with me the same throughout our journey together. And then as new clients come in, they are coming in at a higher rate. The downside to this is I currently have students at several different hourly rates, which means that every time I have to set up billing. So in the fall, when I have to restart billing for all my students' new schedules, I am constantly referring to old billing information and referring to my documentation to make sure I have the right rate for each client. So that's a little extra work for me. But over time, it'll start to even out as old clients move on and new clients come in at the higher rate. Another option, if you're looking at raising rates, if you're getting pushback from parents because they either they don't think the higher rate is fair or they can't afford it, or you're just not comfortable raising your hourly rate for one-on-one tutoring, is you can offer other services. So you can offer groups. So if you no longer want to continue with one-on-one tutoring, I do offer a small group. Or if you're not comfortable with that new rate, I could give you a 45-minute session instead of a 60-minute session at that price. So you can sort of meet them halfway. You're not backing down. Your rates are your rates and you're going to raise them, but you can offer alternatives to make that service affordable to parents on a continuing basis. You can also sort of soften that blow by offering some incentives to parents. So you could offer an additional session per week at a discount. That's a way of increasing your revenue. You would have to work more, but increasing your revenue without raising your rates. You can also offer incentives for families who refer new clients to you, or for families who choose a monthly payment option. Be careful of the deals that you offer, though, because in your excitement to get a new family on board for tutoring, you don't want to offer them something that is not sustainable or doesn't make sense for you. And I think tutors are very prone to this because we're helpful. We got into this business because we want to see kids learn and succeed. And we also know that parents have legitimate needs. They are maybe struggling financially, or it may be a stretch for them to invest in this tutoring. But be careful not to undervalue your services or offer your services at a rate that it doesn't really make it worth your time. If you set a low rate, that says that what you're doing is not valuable, and parents don't view it as valuable. So when they are getting cheap tutoring, they aren't as invested in showing up on time, doing the homework, having their kids behave in an appropriate way in the sessions. So if you offer something that doesn't cost a lot, people often view it as less valuable, unfortunately. Some options for offering deals that work out for both you and the family include keeping a partial or full scholarship slot in your schedule. So you may have a hard time saying no to families who say, well, I just can't afford it, or, do you offer any deals, or could you do it for this price an hour? You can say, well, I do have a scholarship spot in my schedule, but it's full right now. I will let you know when this spot becomes available, and I'd love to work with your child. Or you can, I think it just makes it easier in your head too, when people are asking you for discounts. If you have a way of saying yes, you're not necessarily saying yes to them or yes every time, but you decide what you can afford to offer and you find a way to offer it. You can also do a short-term discount. So at one point, I had a parent who was on the fence about signing on with me, and she was a single parent and was uncertain about her schedule, or she was finishing up school, I think, and was concerned about my rates. And so I offered her a discount in the short term. I said, let's try it for 6 weeks at this rate. At the end of 6 weeks, we can talk about whether you want to continue for a full program. And ultimately, they kind of flaked out before the 6 weeks. They started to cancel, and they didn't end up signing on long term. And because I only offered the discount for 6 weeks, it wasn't a great loss to me. Um, but it wasn't a good fit for them, I guess. So another option you can give is a bring a friend small group. So if you have a certain hourly rate that you charge for one-on-one tutoring, you could offer a rate a little bit higher than that for a small group of two. So for example, if your hourly rate is $50 an hour, you could say, well, if you can find someone to split the sessions with, then it would be $30 a piece per hour instead. And you don't want to straight up split the cost likely, because you will be now communicating with two families, assessing two students, planning with two students in mind. But if they can find someone to split the cost with, split the session with, you can offer that in some way. And finally, you can offer shorter sessions. So if the parents are worried about the weekly cost, you could offer to reduce the sessions to 45 minutes or 30. Make it clear that the progress the child's going to make is directly related to the time they spend on the content. But if what's the best fit for them right now is shorter sessions and that gets them in the door, that may be worth it to you if you're looking to build your schedule. You can also do some short-term promotions to try to get people in the door. Um, these could include a free assessment or trial session. I offer a 30-minute trial/consult lesson to my potential new students, and that has two purposes. One, it gives me the opportunity to see the student, see if they'd be a good fit for me. It gives the parent the opportunity to see their child in an online lesson, see how I teach and how their child participates, and then we decide if they want to enroll long-term for tutoring. I've also offered a promotion like pay for 4 sessions and get the 5th free. And I find this to be good for summer, where families tend to be looking for something more flexible, or they have a goal to do tutoring, but there's also all these camps and other things. So a promotion that encourages them to stick with you for a fixed number of sessions can be beneficial. Another option is to offer a discount for online tutoring if that's the way you would prefer to see kids, and or charge a higher rate for in-person tutoring. And I did this for a while as I was trying to make the transition to full online tutoring. I offered it at a rate maybe $10 an hour more expensive for me to come to their house. And ultimately, that didn't really work out for me, because the drive was taking me more than 10 to 15 minutes and everything else was the same. So I wasn't really getting compensated the same way for my time when I went to tutor in person. And so, but parents were saying, well, if it's an option I can pay for, I'll take it. So ultimately, I had to say that I was no longer taking in-person students, even at a higher rate. Another option is you can set up a discount for setting up a monthly payment. So really, another way to say that is you charge more for the flexibility of setting up a weekly payment. So I did this at a couple points as I was in the process of raising my rates, or as I was testing out a higher rate. So for example, when I went from $50 an hour to $60 an hour, I would say, well, my rate is $60 an hour. However, if you pay monthly, it's 4 times 50 times the number of sessions. So you pay less per hour if you pay monthly. And that was sort of my my trial balloon to see if that rate of $60 an hour would work. For the most part, parents went for the monthly option that was less expensive. But I did have one family that chose the $60 pay weekly option. Um, and it was a case where the parents had some flexibility or uncertainty in their work schedule, and some things were seasonal, and where the parents were taking turns paying for sessions. And so the flexibility benefited them. And um, down the road, when things sort of settled for them, they began to pay monthly and take that discount. So that's another option. You can offer a referral bonus, which can be a nice promotion. I have one advertised in a link in my email signature. Refer a friend to get a free session. And the way that's set up is if a current family refers a new client, when that client completes their first paid session, I add a credit for a free session to the existing family's invoice. And usually I send an email that says, thank you so much for referring. And they know who they referred. I don't say who it was, but I'll say, thank you so much for sending me a referral. To thank you, here is a free session. You can offer that as either a discount on next month's invoice or as a bonus session. So I'm offering you a free bonus session. Would you like to schedule that on Thursday or Friday next week? If you don't want to offer tutoring services, you can offer something different, like an Amazon gift card. That's something that I feel like anyone would use. You can order them online, send them the code. And that doesn't have to be the full value of a new session either. I think you can kind of a gift card sort of has more of, like, people perceive it more as like free money. So I think maybe a gift card, even in a smaller amount, would be a nice surprise for a family who's made a referral to you, if that's what you feel comfortable doing. And it's not necessary. You can also just send a nice email. Parents will often say to me, oh, I was talking to my neighbor, I was talking to someone that I know this way about what you do, and I sent them your information, so you may hear from them. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, but I think families like to know when that referral has been completed. So I have one family who frequently makes referrals, and she'll ask me, did so-and-so follow up with you? Did so-and-so follow up with you? And it's never for me to say whether I am, what I'm doing with the student, or what, any of their confidential information, but I will say, like, oh, yes, I did speak to her. What a nice family, or something. And sometimes that's all parents are looking for, is just confirmation that we all appreciate their time to refer us. So those are some different options for getting paid. You can keep it as simple as and informal as you want, using just PayPal or Venmo. You can go a little more formal and professional, creating invoices, setting up systems and coupon codes and that kind of stuff. And there's no wrong way to do it. It all depends on the stage of business that you're in and what you feel comfortable doing as a tutor. So I hope that was helpful. I hope I have you thinking about how to set your rates. And let's chat about it in the Facebook group and see if we can problem solve and get things up and running for you.